Hello, I'm Tootight Lautrec. Welcome to the Shakey Sonnet Show, where we're going to be looking at every single last one of Shakespeare's sonnets. We're here at the bottom of the down staircase in the recently sequestered remainders section of an unnamed local library, which may or may not have a lion couchant sitting on the steps out front. But anyway, we're within legal distance away from the sub-basement of PS 75, the Emily Dickinson School, and we're here in the Sonnetarium. Welcome. Today, we'll start with Sonnet 1. Let's start with a refresher of what a sonnet is. It's a poem of just about the perfect length, 14 lines. The Shakespearean sonnet has the rhyme scheme A-B, A-B, C-D, C-D, E-F, E-F, G-G. Almost all of the time. There are a few sonnets in the 154 sonnets that don't exactly follow the rhyme scheme or the sonnet format of 14 lines, and that's sonnet 99, 126, and sonnet 145, but we have a long way before we get there. As I said before, regarding Shakespeare and the sonnets, everyone's an expert and everyone's a fool. If you haven't yet gone to the YouTube video I talked about in my introduction, where Jonathan Bate, Paul Edmondson, and Stanley Wells discuss the varieties of theories about the Shakespeare sonnets, go there right now. They talk about this in a nice long sit down at the University of Warwick. So get a glass of wine and some stinky cheese and set up the YouTubes. You'll be in for a pretty good show. Once you've done that, or even you can do that after I go through my bit here. I'm going to start with a little bit of history behind the sonnets, and I'm not going to talk about every minor detail because, my goodness, we have 154 more lessons to go. We can get to that in due time. The history of the Shakespearean sonnets, or of the Shakespeare sonnets, I should say. In 1609, a man named Thomas Thorpe, I think that was his name, anyway, Thorpe, came out with a book of sonnets attributed to Shakespeare, and this is what's called the quarto. So when you hear people talking about the quarto, the 1609 quarto, that's what they mean. And a quarto is simply a piece of paper that's been folded. It has 4 sonnets written on each section. It's been folded into quarters, which is why it's called a quarto, and it has a sonnet written on each of the sections on both of the sides, so that when you open it, it forms 8 pages. Sonnet 1, Sonnet 2, Sonnet 3, Sonnet 4, Sonnet 5, Sonnet 6, Sonnet 7, and Sonnet 8. So that is the quarto. Or that's the original version that most versions use. In 1640, a man named John Benson decided to take it upon himself to reissue Shakespeare's sonnets, or what he called Shakespeare sonnets, because there are sonnets of other people and poems of other people in that issue. He changed the order of the sonnets from the quarto, and he also changed some of the sexes in the poems from a male to a female, so it wouldn't look like Shakespeare was gay. Be that as it may, that was the authoritative version for a long while. In 1711, there was a new edition by a man named Stevens and another man named Malone, and they restored the quarto order from 1 to 154, which is what we know today. In 1943, Heider Edward Rollins collected 2 volumes of what's called a variorum, where he discusses every version of the Shakespeare sonnet editions up until that point. It was published in 1943. It's very hard to find. I found a copy. There are 2 volumes. It's incredibly interesting, incredibly detailed. It goes into great depth about what word may be here, what word may be here, what word was changed to this, where the punctuation was changed, where the capitalization was changed, where italics were changed to normal letters. If you have a chance to get your hands on it, take a gander at it because it's well worthwhile. So, the sonnet structure for Shakespeare, the English sonnet, 14 lines, A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G, in iambic pentameter. And as I said, iambic pentameter is 10 syllables, an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable 5 times. And you can remember that by saying, I am, I am, I am, I am, I am. And that's iambic pentameter. So, there are 154 sonnets. One of the theories is that the first 126 are to a young man, or possibly to 2 different young men, and that the rest of the sonnets are to what's called a dark lady, a woman of dark complexion. That's the theory that most people go on. They presume that the first 1 to 17, the first 17 sonnets, are supposedly to a young man urging him to marry. Were these commissioned? Was Shakespeare commissioned to do this by the young man's parents? Nobody knows. Were these love poems from Shakespeare to the young man? Nobody knows. Was this simply a dramatic exercise for Shakespeare because the sonnet sequences were in vogue many years earlier? Hard to say. But I will say that if you look at some of these sonnets, you might ask yourself, well, if Shakespeare, who's a fantastic dramatist, can write speeches for Juliet or Gertrude or Beatrice, why can't he write a sonnet in a woman's voice? I propound that he can. So that's one of the many wonderful things about Shakespeare's sonnets, is that we can think about them in the different contexts, even in modern day life. And you can think about whether it's a man to a woman to a man to a man, a woman to a woman, a mother to a son, a nun to a young boy. Hard to say. While we go through the sonnets, I will be looking at I'll have my trusty horn because, you know, Shakespeare had the horn on for any number of people, and we don't necessarily know that it is Shakespeare who had the horn or for whom he had the horn, but if it's a boy, and I suspect that the person receiving the sonnet is a boy, I will honk my horn, and if it's a girl, I will honk my other horn. Today, we're starting with Sonnet 1. One last thing I will say is that one of the best references for reading Shakespeare sonnets is Stephen Booth's edition called, originally enough, Shakespeare Sonnets. And Stephen Booth says about this whole idea of were these to a young man or not, was Shakespeare possibly gay? Stephen Booth says, William Shakespeare was almost certainly homosexual, bisexual, or heterosexual. The sonnets provide no evidence on the matter. There you go. We'll go with that for now. Now, move this to the side. I'm using the Signet Classics Shakespeare Sonnets, the new revised edition, which hews very closely to the 1609 quarto version. I'm going to be talking about this, but I originally got this Signet Classics that was not revised, and if we just open up that book, I will show you Sonnet 1, line 3. In the unrevised version, line 3 ends with the word decrease. And in all of the other more authoritative versions, the word is not decrease, but decease, which to me is quite a big deal. If you go to visit Grandmama Lautrec and you ask the doctor, how is she doing, doctor? And he says, well, this morning she was quite perky, but as of now she's decreased. You think, well, it doesn't sound good, but there may be some time anyway to go and talk to her about that diamond tiara before Cousin Hulga gets in there and gets her hands on it. But if, however, the doctor comes out and says, well, unfortunately, Grandmama Lautrec is deceased, that's a whole different story. Hulga's gone and got that tiara, and you're left to just sit at home alone. Well, or not. In any case, there's quite a difference between decease and decrease. And I've searched and searched and searched, and I can't find how the original Signet Classics could have used decrease instead of decease. They have a couple of other variations in their poems, and I find this very interesting, which is all just to say that over the years, many, many editions have come out. Many, many editors have changed things or rearranged things to their own liking with, I think, the best intentions. But it's just, you have to be careful. If you're going to be studying the sonnets with a group of people, make sure that you have the exact same version and that you're aware of the differences that you may encounter. So now on to the new revised edition of Sonnet 1, the Shakespeare Sonnets. I'm just going to read it through at first. I'm going to talk about what it could possibly mean, and then we'll get a little bit more into the ways in which it means what it means and where it might fit in all of these theories. So I'll read it through once. From fairest creatures we desire increase, that thereby beauty's rose might never die, but as the riper should by time decease, his tender air might bear his memory. But thou, contracted to thine own bright eyes, feed'st thy light's flame with self-substantial fuel, making a famine where abundance lies, thyself thy foe, to thy sweet self too cruel. Thou that art now the world's fresh ornament, and only herald to the gaudy spring, within thine own bud buryest thy content, and, tender churl, mak'st waste in niggarding. Pity the world, or else this glutton be, to eat the world's due, by the grave and thee. So, this poem, like the next 16 that follow it, are exhortations to a person, a young person who's still in the prime of their life, to be fruitful and multiply. Have a child. You're beautiful. You're lovely. You're gorgeous. You're cuter than Linda Evangelista. You should have someone to carry on your genes and your beautiful, beautiful set of features by having a child, and then eternity is yours because your features will live on in all of their beauty. So what is the poem saying? It's simply saying, be fruitful and multiply. You're young. You're cute. You know you're cute because you're constantly adoring yourself. So let's just go line to line. From fairest creatures we desire increase. You're fair. By fair they mean beautiful. From beautiful people, we want an increase of those people. We want them to multiply, or we want anything that's beautiful to have more beauty. So you increase their number. From fairest creatures we desire, that thereby beauty's rose might never die. Now, here's where the rose comes in. In the quarto version, the rose is capitalized and italicized, and there are many people who believe that this means something, and it may have meant something. For those theorists who say that this is an autobiographical poem or a poem for done on commission to a young person in order to convince them to multiply. Some people believe that there's a man named Risley, who's possibly pronounced Rosley, that it was to him. Some people think it was someone else. But in any case, this rose stands as a figure of beauty, a symbol of beauty, but also as we go through you can see that it can be sexualized in many a way. It can be sexualized quite simply, phallically. You get the idea. But also, if you've ever looked at a rose, it's rather feminine looking in a lot of ways. So, from fairest creatures we desire increase, that thereby beauty's rose might never die. But as the riper, the older, or the, if this rose were riper, some of the leaves would be falling off it. As the riper should by time decease, it's going to die as it gets older and older and older, and so will you. But as the riper should by time decease, his tender air might bear his memory. His and his. So in this sense, we have a male pronoun, his, but it could simply be the capitalized rose, which is the symbol for beauty, just as sometimes the sun is capitalized, or man in general, humankind, is masculinized in, 1609. Who knows? So I don't believe we have a horn here yet. I'm sorry to say. I'll set this here just in case. So here we have a generalized quatrain, the first 4 lines, where it's simply talking about, fair creatures. We wanted them to increase. We don't, that we know that they're going to die sometime, but as they get older, they'll die. But maybe if there's a progeny, the rose will have a progeny with likeness to it. And then we get into specifics. It goes from a generalized statement to the specific. But thou. So here we have a thou. There's a person to whom this poem is addressed. But thou, contracted to thine own bright eyes. And by contracted, it could mean, for instance, betrothed, or there's a contract of marriage. So you're so in love with yourself that you just can't tear yourself away from that mirror. You're contracted to thine own bright eyes. Or it could mean you're lessened, you've shrunken to the only thing that you can see is you and your beauty. So thou, contracted to thine own bright eyes, feedst thy light's flame with self-substantial fuel. Well, if that doesn't sound like a lit match, I don't know what does. So here we bring in the idea of a candle that as it burns, it eats itself away. It just burns and burns and burns and burns, eating itself away. But if you're going to memorize this poem and say it out loud, which I will be doing for all the 154 sonnets, I will just say that pretend that you have gotten a little hair between your teeth. I won't say what kind of hair, but it happens every once in a while. Feedst thy light's flame with self-substantial fuel. Before the fire trucks come and take you away, apparently. Apparently they've put the fire out, but the candle still burns at both ends. So feedst thy light's flame with self-substantial fuel, making a famine where abundance lies. So you're starving yourself, even when, as the flame grows higher and higher and gets hotter and hotter, it's starving itself of its substance. Thyself, thy foe, to thy sweet self too cruel. Give yourself a break, buddy. Stop playing with the bud. Just put it to better use. So there are the first 2 quatrains, the first octave, where we have a generalized discussion of beauty and how it should increase, and then an indictment. You should stop playing around and really put your beauty to good use. And then sort of a synthesis of the generalized with the specific. Thou that art now the world's fresh ornament, you know, you little lovely thing, you think you're so wonderful. And I mean, I'm just saying, I think you are too. Thou that art now the world's fresh ornament, and only herald to the gaudy spring. Well, here's the flag that we're flying for spring. It's a beautiful rose. But there's also the suggestion of merely herald to the gaudy spring, because this rose won't last forever. Thou that art now the world's fresh ornament, and only herald to the gaudy spring, within thine own bud buryest thy content, or content. It's either contentedness, you know, you're so self-satisfied that you're just going to sit there and fiddle your bud, or it's your content, the seeds, the pistils and the stamens that may, you know, where the bee sucks, there suck I, said Shakespeare somewhere sometime. But within thine own bud thou buryest thy content, which still could be masculine or feminine. Within thine own bud buryest thy content or content. And tender churl makes waste in niggarding. Niggarding just means hoarding. So if someone hoards something all to themselves, they believe that they're creating riches, but in fact they're wasting it, because it will all go to waste after they're dead. It's just hidden in one place. If you have a bunch of potato chips and you just hoard them, then 3 years down the road and you still don't eat them, you're still going to be starving. So why bother to hoard them? Eat them when they're fresh. And tender churl, some people say that perhaps, but no. I mean, it could be a term for a man, but basically it just means it's another word for someone who hoards everything for themselves. And in fact, we see this in Romeo and Juliet, where Juliet reproaches the dead Romeo. It's a term of endearment. Tender churl doesn't seem like it's a very nice thing to say, but when Juliet finds Romeo dead from having quaffed a little vial of poison, she says, "Oh, churl, drunk all and left no friendly drop." Because, you know, there she is alone again. So, the couplet, pity the world, or else this glutton be, meaning you're the glutton. You're holding everything to yourself, you're keeping it all to yourself, you're eating it all, it's a tremendous waste. Eating the world's due, eating up everything that there is for you, which, by the way, includes growing old and dying. To eat the world's due by the grave and thee. So basically, stop playing with your bud and get going, reproduce. So there's no clear recipient to this poem. Is it a boy? Can't say for sure. Is it a girl? Can't say for sure. I could imagine, for instance, Juliet's nurse coming in and saying the same poem to her, saying, you know, you don't want to marry Paris. You want to live your life and be your pretty little self, but, you know, you got to get married and have kids one day. So pity the world. Have at it, girl. Come on. I could totally see the nurse saying that in Romeo and Juliet. I could also see someone saying that to Hamlet. You know, quit mooning around the castle, buddy. Ophelia's right over there. Go do your stuff. Who knows? Could it be an older man for a younger man? It could be. Could it be a woman for another woman? I believe it could be, yes. I mean, I don't think about that all that much, but yes, I believe that it could be. Is this the start of something good? The first poem of 154 that starts an entire novel? We shall see. Too early to tell right at the moment. But if you have any questions, sorry, I'll get the horn out of the way now. If you have any questions, if there's anybody even out there, feel free to ask me, and I'll see what I can do to answer it. In the meantime, pay attention to the world because it is full of wonder, and I'm not just saying that. If you enjoyed this lesson and you think somebody else would benefit from it, let them know. If you're in a class, a Shakespeare class, let your class know. If you're teaching Shakespeare and you'd rather let me do the job instead of you doing it, happy to help you out. Tell your friends. I'm all yours. Subscribe or don't subscribe. It doesn't really matter. I'll just sit in the garden and eat worms, okay? In any case, welcome to the Shakey Sonnet Show. I'll let you go now out into the world to pay attention to it. I'm Tootight Lautrec. Mwah.